In this market update, I'm going to be talking about how tax rate changes affect the economy, but more importantly, how it affects you as an individual. Hi, Jim Gore from THOR Wealth Management. We're getting a lot of questions about tax rates, how it can impact people individually, but also how it impacts the economy. So let's talk about the economy first and foremost. When I started in the industry, a big thing that was being touted was the Laffer Curve. And I just want to show this chart here. And what the Laffer Curve is saying is that there's an optimum tax rate to get the most amount of revenue. And so obviously, if you go all the way to the left of this chart, if your tax rate is zero, you're going to get zero income. You start raising the tax rate, revenue goes up. But what happens is when you have the tax rate so high, what happens is people won't be incentivized to work to get extra income, and your income actually starts dropping down. Figure if you have a 100% tax rate, why would I sell something if I'm going to pay 100% tax on that? That would not make sense to me, so I'll just hold the investment. And this is something that I was touted as adding revenue. But what's interesting is there's been a number of charts that have shown that revenue to the federal government has been pretty consistent for GDP as a percentage of GDP. Has been somewhere around 18 to 22% regardless of tax rates, and I'll show you that here. You look at this chart here, and this is from the Concord Coalition that looks at tax rates for corporations, individuals, and this is the highest tax rate, and capital gains and dividends. And you can see here that the highest tax rate for income back in the 50s and 60s was 90%. And it came down over that time period. And where we are with income is fairly low to historically where it's been. But also that you can see here that capital gains rate is right around the midpoint of what it has been. And there's been some discussion about capital gains rate. And question is, will that impact our economy? Well, what's really interesting here is, will it impact us when they change taxes? And this is looking at the tax rate going back to 1913 for the highest tax rate for household incomes. And the gray section is the recessions. And you can see here there's absolutely no correlation whatsoever between tax rates and recessions. So it's not an impact on recession. I would say that inverted yield curve for a long time period has more of an impact on recession than the tax rate. Now, I'd also argue that at a time period after a yield curve inversion, to raise taxes is not a good thing. Overall, just raising taxes on themselves does not mean that we're going to have a recession. It does mean something when you have an inverted yield curve has more impact. And I talked about that earlier in one of my market updates, why that's important. But also over the long run, if you look at GDP, regardless of what the tax rates have been, GDP has consistently grown except for two periods. That was 2008, 2009, when we had the Great Recession. Then also you look at what happened during COVID. We saw GDP drop for a short time period and it came back. So this is going back to 1947. Remember, this is what a time period at the beginning here when tax rates were at 90% for the highest tax rate. So if you look at this, tax rates do not have any impact whatsoever on the amount of, as a percentage of GDP, that the economy is going to grow. It doesn't have any impact whatsoever on a recession. But the biggest thing is it impacts you as an individual. And let me look at this chart here. This is the last one, and this is an example. We had a client that had a similar situation back in 2012. They had an asset with a big capital gain in it, and they were looking to sell it. And the decision was, hey, should we sell in 2012 or 2013? Why is this important? In 2012, the capital gains rate was 15%, but in 2013, it went up to 23.8%, and that is a 20% capital gain plus for Obamacare paying the net investment income tax, and that was 3.8%. That was part of the Obamacare legislation. So we saw taxes, capital gain rate go from 15% to 23.8%. So you look at this, a $2 million gain. If I sold it on December 31st of 2012, I paid $300,000 in taxes. What happens in 2013? That capital gains taxes paid goes up to $476,000. Just one day later, I sell this security, I pay $176,000 $1,000 more in taxes. It's just human nature. What are you going to do? Of course, I'm going to sell in 2012 and not sell in 2013. So this will affect you as an individual if capital gains rates go up. If you perceive it that capital gains are going to go up next year, what you'll see is people will be selling off at the end of this year. And that's just to make sure that they're paying less in capital gains. What's interesting is that the best economy that we ever saw was in Hong Kong, and that was back in the 80s and 90s. And why is that? Well, it was owned by Britain. Britain didn't care about social engineering. They didn't care about manipulating the tax rate. Keep in mind, I showed you the tax rate has changed, but it didn't have any impact on the economy. It affected individuals and their choices. So what happened was they didn't care about the social engineering. They just wanted the most money reverted back to Britain. So what they did is they kept the low tax rate of 15%, and Hong Kong was the best performing economy at that time period, and that's because they kept rates low. Also, Russia, back in the early 2000s, Putin put in a tax rate, flat rate of 13%, recommended by top economists here in the United States, and their economy did very well. Actually, before they invaded Ukraine, their economics from a government standpoint was one of the best before Putin blew it, and now he wants to raise taxes, which is going to hurt him in the future. So all in all, very important to understand how taxes impact us, but more importantly, how it impacts you as an individual when you're making investment decisions. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, reach out to us at THORwealthmanagement.com or give us a call. Take care and talk to you in a couple weeks.